Hey, it's Tim here. In today's video, we're going to be covering a topic that has taken me a while to understand, but it's going to be VDS, VIZql Data Service, the concept of decoupling, and this term that was mentioned called Headless BI. And then we're also going to touch on some sort of small concepts around layers. Anyway, there's a lot to cram in. Let's get stuck in. Okay, so at the Tableau conference keynote, Pedro announced something called the VIZql Data Service. And he threw a few terms in, for example,
Headless BI, decoupling.
And so what I wanted to do is sort of really dig into that, but I really can make a video immediately because fundamentally, I didn't actually know what Tableau meant by the term. Of course, you can go out on the internet and look at these things and sort of come to some sort of conclusion, but I was actually able to get a bit of time with a few people internally at Tableau who knew a bit more about how the service has come about and sort of some of the thinking that's going to come out. And so I have to sort of lead with this and say that, look, this service has not been announced, it's not been released, it's not in public, it won't be probably until next year. But because it was in the keynote, we can speculate a little bit about it. So let's find out and let me show you what I think this service is going to be like. Let's hop into Excalibur where we can go through a diagram that I've prepared for you. Okay, so I want to start off by setting the scene here. What I want to do is essentially take you through a diagram. So I've hidden the diagram, and on the left, I've got two arrows. One is green and one is purple. Now, these are conceptual arrows. I just want you to be absolutely clear that what you're about to see is not technically correct. It's conceptually correct, but it's not technically correct. And so on the left here, we have the journey and we have the analytical flow, which starts from the bottom and goes up. And then on the right, you have the consumption workflow, which goes from the top and goes down. Essentially, what I'm trying to show here is that if you're an analyst building some of these assets, whether it's a Tableau Pulse view or dashboard or metric, whatever you're building, you start from the bottom of this flow going upwards. And then when you're actually using these tools, when you're actually consuming this data, consuming this analysis, you actually go the other way around. You go from the top down. And that's an important sort of journey to understand. But it also means that the journeys are actually two different things. Consumption and creation are completely separate. They don't sort of always marry up. But in the Tableau platform, of course, they can actually overlap in lots of different ways. And that's why this sort of blue-purple thing is a little bit confusing. But let's take a look at this diagram. Let's select this and move this across. Now, in today's world, this diagram on the left is sort of accurate. Really, what you should be looking at is a Tableau architecture diagram. This gives you an accurate view of where all the services are sat, but it doesn't help me with my explanation. So this is what I've made instead. So if we go from the bottom up and let's look at the analytical flow, when you're building a dashboard or a metric or something for an end user to consume, you'd start here with your data sources at the bottom. It could be in Google Drive, it could be in the cloud, it could be wherever you want it. The data sources can come from a multitude of sources, including flat files on your machine. Once you have that, once you've connected to your data source, you see the next step I go to here is server and cloud. Now, I've done this because in a world where web authoring is a predominant experience and in a world where data sources mostly live on Tableau server and cloud, this is technically true. But if I was being strict, where you'd actually start from, an analytical workflow is you'd start off in desktop, then go down to your data sources, connect to your data sources, and then once you've connected to your data sources, you then start building dashboards. Once you've built your dashboards, you then publish them back up to server. And then now you've published them to server, they can start to do all the other things. For example, you can use the embedded data source within the workbook to build a new view. You could even publish the data source within that dashboard to Tableau server and cloud, and then use those in other dashboards and other metrics. So this diagram starts to get a bit confusing. And then once you've got your metrics or your dashboard set up, from those, you can then go and do a bunch of things. One of those is do an embedded experience where you put it inside of an application or you put it in a web page. Or you go on the left-hand side and you send it out to a client. The client could be Tableau Desktop or Tableau Prep. This is in essence me connecting back to a data source that's hosted in server or cloud if you're using desktop or prep. If you're on mobile, then this is essentially just the Tableau server, Tableau cloud app on your mobile consuming dashboards and metrics. If you're on the web, then you're browsing the Tableau server, Tableau cloud portal, browsing the Explore tab, looking for visualizations and using them. And of course, at the very end, you've got your end users here at the top. They're the ones who are fundamentally just, users. They could be explorers, viewers, whatever they are. They are the analysts coming in to look at some data. And so in this flow, this is sort of broadly the worldview today, and this is how it works. Again, this is not 100% accurate, but just bear with me as I try and explain this. So that's the world today. And Tableau threw this term called Headless BI. And what I was trying to sort of represent, what do they really mean? Well, in that strict flow where you're starting from desktop, you're going to your data source, then you're going up to your dashboard, you publish it to server and cloud, then you go up to one of these experiences. These experiences all require metrics or dashboards to work. So you can't, for example, if I sort of bring my annotation tools back, you can't really give a user any sort of experience unless it has a metric or a dashboard. They have to start there. Even if you just wanted the data source, you'd still have to create a dashboard that the JavaScript API could query or some other API could query. And then from there, you could go on and build your experience. They need a dashboard. And that's essentially not headless. Headless BI is essentially this concept where you don't need a dashboard. You're essentially decoupling, which is the term Tableau used, the infrastructure, so you can choose at what point you're taking part in the journey. I'll come to a diagram a little later that explains this in more detail, but this is sort of the world today. Let's take a look at the world in the future. And for this, I've added Tableau GPT and Tableau Pulse into this matrix so you can get a better view of sort of where everything might sit. Again, might sit because I don't know, we haven't seen the features. So let's go ahead and remove this. So this is the new diagram. And what we can see here is that actually is very similar. The way end users and the way people work is exactly the same. However, if you go down here to the server and cloud section, it's a little bit busier. And what you can see here is that fundamentally, you now have, where before you had metrics and dashboards, you now have essentially three options. You have Tableau Pulse, which is just over here. You have VIZql Data Service, which is this there. And then you have your dashboards. And the way to think of this is these three are equal citizens to the data source. They all have the same access to the same data source. So here's the first big change. This means you could build three separate experiences that are all pulling from the same data source that is either published to Tableau server or cloud or is going through a virtual connection or anything. Any of those things sit on top of the connection layer. And so the way to think of this is actually layers. It's actually a really good way of thinking about it. So if I go back here and strictly speaking, we think of these as like a tower. You start with your data source. You go and connect to your data source. Again, you'd be doing this in desktop, but just bear with me. Let's start from the bottom. You start from your data source. That's just your raw data source, whether it's Tableau server, Tableau cloud, whatever it is, you start there. Once you've done that, you publish up your server, you publish up your connection to server or cloud. And once the data is there, you now have three options. You can either build a metric, go and define a metric, and then have it live inside of Tableau Pulse. You can ask an analyst to build something very bespoke, maybe a dashboard, maybe something nice, maybe something that even uses Tableau Pulse and a metric built in Tableau Pulse. Or you could ask your developers to use VIZql Data Service to query the same data source to then go off and build an application interface that uses D3 in a web browser somewhere else. Okay, so those are your three options. And so you can kind of look at VIZql Data Service in this instance, primarily being for embedded services and applications. Essentially, VIZql Data Service, the only real reason you need to use this is if you want to build something external somewhere else, right? That's the only real reason it makes sense. Otherwise, you just use the front end and setup that Tableau give you through its own product, which just comes out of the box ready to go and is seamless. You don't have to sort of rebuild or put any dev time behind it. But for companies who do want to build a more tailored experience like Tableau showed during the keynote, this would be one of the ways of doing that, okay? Now, the other thing to bear in mind here is that Tableau GPT is sort of sitting around these data sources. So Tableau GPT was described by Tableau as being, Tableau's own efforts at generative AI. I can't say this. I'm having another what is it? I just can't say these words. It's just so confusing. Anyway, this technology is going to sit around this. And the way Tableau showed it was side by side, but really strictly speaking, Tableau GPT needs access to all of these things to be able to enhance your experience. And then server and cloud remains what it is today, the secure sort of, governed space that IT admins can use to control and manage everyone. and everything runs on already the infrastructure that's there for server and cloud. So it's all set up nicely, and it's sort of nice and easy to work with. And so that's sort of how this starts to work. And so you can hopefully start to realize that, look, this actually changes in a very meaningful way a couple of things, not just how users consume information and data, as Tableau showed, but actually also workflows. And so what I did is I tried to make a much simpler diagram just here on the bottom. So let's go ahead and move this out of the way. So if I just move this out of the way, and just look at today and the future, you see on the left, you have today's world. So you have your end user, okay? And they can choose their window into a data source. They can either use Tableau metrics, they can either go to a dashboard, and they can essentially just, browse their setup how they want. But it's actually quite narrow. Everything has to originate from the dashboard pretty much. There is no real way around it. The other thing you could do is you could, have your data sources going into Tableau available through other platforms and other systems, but you'd have to build those outside of Tableau. That's obviously always been possible. But yeah, it's a very sort of different setup to the one we have here on the right, which is really the ability to choose the window into your data source. You can choose 3 ways of looking at the same thing. There is an interface to define the metrics that is decoupled from the dashboarding experience. Previously, it was very much part of the dashboarding experience. And then the other thing is you can request data without having to put anything in front of it. You don't have to have any sort of showroom for your data. You can go ahead and pump it into whatever other service or API you have. And for the record, there are many services and APIs that have ready to go systems out of the box that you can do this with. So this is a diagram I'm still working on. I'm still not sort of super happy with it. There's a couple of things that are wrong. And in a way, there's never going to be a right version, because depending on what you're talking about, this diagram will need to change. It's kind of like a 4D chess where you've got to look at it in different dimensions for it to make sense. But hopefully this starts to explain sort of all these concepts. And so I think the big change for analysts, if you're a data analyst today and you're kind of wondering, well, how's this going to change my workflow? I think this is fundamentally it. You're going to need to actually start thinking about, I don't think VIZql Data Service will be one of the big things unless you're a developer, an API. That will be pretty much a standalone thing. But you'll need to think whether you want to define metrics so that they're available in Tableau Pulse with all the goodness that comes there, or you're going to build a dashboard that does the same thing, but will probably not get the same love and attention long term as something like Tableau Pulse get. You know that Tableau Pulse is going to get a whole bunch of suite of features that are going to hook into newer technologies, of course, obviously running in Tableau Cloud. My hunch is Tableau Pulse is 100% going to be a cloud-only feature. I can't imagine, Tableau putting the kind of work required, or even admins necessarily, being willing to beef up their infrastructures to the level that can let something like Tableau Pulse run. If you really want to know, for Tableau to sort of train an LLM to do this kind of work, it's a serious investment. If you look at the likes of ChatGPT and OpenAI, they're investing, we're literally talking thousands of hardware, thousands of GPUs, thousands of computing hardware, a ton of time. It takes a really long time. And whilst all of that is happening, it costs money and electricity, and that is just an investment. And that's just stage one. There are multiple stages to training an LLM. It can take months on end using all of this hardware with the right expertise. And at the end of it, you have something close to what ChatGPT has. There's something called an ELO score, ELO, and essentially that rates how good an LLM model is. And so it's going to be interesting to see how Tableau GPT sort of embraces this, where that sort of investment takes them, and sort of what kind of capability are we seeing with a technology like this versus the things we are seeing more generally through companies like Microsoft, OpenAI, and Google. Anyway, we're getting off track here. I just wanted to describe what's going on with VIZql's data service using this diagram. So hopefully at some point next year when it comes out, we can dig a little bit deeper and find out more about it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.